My stepfather ripped my bedroom door off because I had a girl over, yelling that I broke his trust and said I don't deserve privacy as long as I'm under his roof. So I packed my bags and never looked back. My stepfather was standing in my doorway holding a screwdriver, with my bedroom door lying flat at his feet. "You broke my trust," he said, like I'd stolen a car instead of doing calculus. "Privacy is earned." Mom stood behind him, wringing her hands but saying nothing. The hallway felt smaller with both of them there, watching me process what had just happened. My door was gone. Actually, gone. I looked past my stepfather to where my door used to hang. The hinges were still attached to the frame, but the pins were missing. He'd planned this. "This is extreme," Mom finally said, but her voice was small. "Extreme is finding out your teenage son has been lying about having girls in his room." My stepfather turned the screwdriver over in his hands. "This is accountability." I hadn't been lying. Chloe and I really were working on derivatives. Our calculus textbooks were still open on my desk, covered in eraser shavings and margin notes, but he had already decided what he'd seen. He walked away carrying my door like evidence from a crime scene. Mom lingered in the doorway for a few seconds, opened her mouth to say something, then followed him downstairs. I could hear them talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. 20 minutes later, I went downstairs for dinner. He had made spaghetti and was serving it up like nothing had happened. He asked me about practice, about my upcoming physics test, about whether I needed help with college applications. Normal family dinner conversation. Except my bedroom door was now dismantled in the garage. My stepfather started talking about a project at his construction site, some problem with the electrical wiring that was going to delay the whole job by 2 weeks. He seemed relaxed, satisfied even, like removing my door had solved some major household crisis. I ate my spaghetti and watched him. The way he kept checking to make sure I was listening. The way he smiled when he caught me looking at him. He was enjoying this. That night I tried to sleep without a door. Every sound from the hallway made me hyper-aware of how exposed I was. My stepfather getting a glass of water at midnight. Mom going to the bathroom at 2 a.m. The house settling around me like I was camping in the living room. Around 3 a.m. I heard my stepfather walking down the hall. His footsteps stopped outside my room. I could feel him standing there watching me sleep, or pretend to sleep. He stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, just watching. Then his footsteps continued to the bathroom, and I heard him close that door behind him. It didn't stop at the door. Suddenly there were rules for breathing. Hourly check-ins when I was out, tell me what you learned in each class, random phone wellness checks, and morning discussions about whether my teachers were pushing an agenda. It wasn't parenting, it was patrol. Friends faded because he'd call their parents with lists of questions. The house shrank around me until even my thoughts felt loud. At first I brushed it off as typical overprotective parent behavior. Maybe he'd had a bad day at work. Maybe seeing me with a girl reminded him that I was growing up, and that made him uncomfortable. Then a second thing happened the following week. I got home from school around 3:30 like always, but my stepfather was already there sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and this expectant look on his face. "How was school?" he asked, which would have been normal except for the way he said it, like he was interviewing me for a job. "Fine," I said, grabbing an apple from the counter. "Why are you home early?" "Job site got rained out. Thought we could spend some time together." This was already weird because my stepfather had never shown interest in my academic life, beyond asking if I was keeping my grades up. But I sat down and started talking about the essay I was writing for English class. "What's it about?" he asked. "The American Dream and Death of a Salesman." "Never read it. What's your argument?" I explained my thesis about how Willy Loman represents the failure of capitalism to provide meaning, and he nodded along like he was taking mental notes. "Sounds pretty critical of America," he said when I finished. "It's critical of certain economic systems, not America as a whole." "Same difference." He took a long sip of coffee. "Your teacher assigning a lot of books like that?" "Like what?" "Anti-American books." I stared at him. "It's literally part of the American literary canon. Arthur Miller was born in New York." This conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my stepfather questioning everything from my history textbook to my biology teacher's stance on evolution. It felt like he was building a case for something, but I couldn't figure out what. When Mom got home, he immediately launched into this detailed recap of our conversation, presenting it like he'd uncovered some concerning information about my education. "Maybe we should look into those private schools across town," he suggested. "Better values." Mom looked confused. "His grades are fine. Why would we change schools junior year?" "It's not about grades, it's about worldview." Maybe I was overreacting to what was probably just awkward small talk. My stepfather wasn't used to being around teenagers. He'd never had kids of his own. Maybe he was just trying to connect and didn't know how. Everyone said it wasn't a big deal when I mentioned it to my friends at lunch. Adam laughed and said his stepdad was way worse, always going through his phone and checking his browser history. Natalie said at least mine was trying to be involved. "You're lucky he cares," she said while picking at her salad. "Most step-parents don't even bother." But something about his version of caring felt off. It was too intense, too focused, like he was studying me instead of getting to know me. The pattern continued for the next few weeks. My stepfather would come home early from work and corner me for these weird interrogation sessions disguised as father-son bonding time. He wanted to know about every assignment, every teacher, every conversation I had with classmates. He started asking specific questions about Chloe, too. Had she been to other boys' houses? Did she have a boyfriend? What did her parents do for work? "Why do you need to know all this stuff about Chloe?" I finally asked. "I'm trying to understand who you're spending time with. That's what responsible parents do." Except it didn't feel responsible. It felt invasive. I found something he was trying to hide from me, and it was small but hard to ignore. I discovered it by accident when I was looking for my car keys one morning. My stepfather had left his phone on the kitchen counter, and when I picked it up to move it, the screen lit up with a text message notification. The message was from my mom, but it was about me. "Did you ask him about the college applications yet?" I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to see the full conversation thread. It read, "Found his essay for English. It's worse than we thought." Mom had responded, "What do you mean worse?" He had written back, "Dangerous ideas that could ruin his values. This is what happens when kids read too much of that stuff." Mom replied, "It's just a school assignment. This isn't right. We need to be more involved in what he's learning. Maybe homeschooling would be better." I screenshotted the conversation before I could talk myself out of it, then put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. My stepfather had been reading my homework behind my back. Not just reading it, but photographing it and analyzing analyzing it like evidence of some crime. And he was talking to my mom about major life changes without including me in the conversation. I started paying closer attention to his behavior after that. The way he lingered outside my bedroom when I was on phone calls. The way he asked my mom detailed questions about my whereabouts when I was out with friends. Then I discovered something else that made denial harder. I found it 3 weeks later when I was doing laundry. My stepfather had asked me to wash his work clothes, which I'd done plenty of times before. While sorting through his pockets to make sure there were no pens or receipts that would get destroyed in the wash, I found a small notebook. It was the kind of notebook contractors use for jotting down measurements and supply lists. But when I opened it, I found pages of notes about me. The first entry was dated about a month earlier. Came home 4:15 p.m. Said he was at library but no books with him. Claimed he forgot them in his locker. There were entries for almost every day since then. What time I got home, where I said I'd been, who I'd talked to, what mood I seemed to be in. One entry read, had girl over Chloe to study. Door remained open, but they were whispering. Seemed suspicious. Need to monitor this relationship. Page after page of observations, suspicions, and theories about my behavior. It read like surveillance notes from a private investigator. The most recent entry was from yesterday. Attitude has changed. More secretive. Possible bad influence from school friends. Consider searching room. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't parental concern. This was obsession. I took photos of every page with my phone, then carefully put the notebook back exactly where I'd found it. When my stepfather got home that evening, I watched him differently. The way his eyes tracked my movements around the house. The way he asked seemingly casual questions that I now realized were anything but casual. Later that night, I texted my friend Adam. Can I call you? Need to talk about something. Adam called back within minutes. What's up, man? You sound stressed. I told him about the notebook, the text messages, the weird interrogations, everything that had been building up over the past month. Dude, that's really weird, he said. Like, really weird. Have you talked to your mom about it? I don't know how. He has her convinced he's just being a good parent. That's not good parenting. That's like spy stuff. The next day, I found something that ended any debate about what was really happening. I got home from school that afternoon and my stepfather wasn't there yet, but his coffee cup was still on the kitchen table, which meant he'd been home during lunch break. Something felt different about my room when I walked in. Nothing was obviously out of place, but there was a sense that someone had been there. I started checking my belongings more carefully. My laptop was closed but warm, like it had been used recently. My desk drawers were in the same order but felt looser, like they'd been opened and closed quickly. Then I found it. Tucked behind my dresser was a small device about the size of a thumb drive. It turned out to be an audio recorder he'd planted to capture everything I said in my room. I'd never seen it before, which meant someone had put it there. Recently, I carefully extracted the device without disturbing its position. It was definitely some kind of audio recorder, with a tiny LED light that blinked red every few seconds. My stepfather had been recording my private conversations. Every phone call with friends. Every time I talked to myself while doing homework. Every conversation I'd had in my bedroom for who knows how long. I left the device exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to wait for Mom to get home from work. When Mom got home, I asked if we could all sit down and talk. I said it was important. What's this about? Mom asked, settling into her favorite chair in the living room. I took a deep breath. He's been monitoring me. My stepfather's expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of the text messages first. He's been reading my homework and discussing pulling me out of school without telling me. Mom read through the messages, her frown deepening with each line. What is this? I'm concerned about the influences at his school, my stepfather said. I think we need to be more involved in his education. By talking behind his back about homeschooling, by protecting him from ideologies that could damage his future. I moved on to the notebook photos. It gets worse. Mom's face went pale as she scrolled through images of his surveillance notes. You've been keeping a log of his daily activities? Parents need to know what their children are doing, he said, but his voice was less confident now. This isn't parenting, Mom said. This is stalking. I stood up. There's more. I walked them both upstairs to my bedroom and pointed to the recording device behind my dresser. He's been recording my private conversations. The room went completely silent. Mom stared at the device, then at my stepfather, then back at the device. Is that what I think it is? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Tell me you didn't put a recording device in my son's bedroom. I was concerned about behavioral changes, he said finally. Kids today hide things from their parents. I needed to know what was really going on. By violating his privacy, by recording his personal conversations, by being a responsible parent. Mom was shaking now. I'd never seen her this angry. This is not responsible parenting. This is surveillance. I call it protecting your son from influences you're too naive to see, he shot back. He's being indoctrinated at that school and you're too busy working to notice. He's getting good grades. He's never been in trouble. What exactly are you protecting him from? From becoming another campus kid who thinks he knows better than everyone. The mask had finally slipped. This wasn't about my safety or well-being. This was about control. My stepfather didn't apologize for the recording device or the surveillance notes. Instead, he doubled down on his position that everything he'd done was justified by his role as my stepfather. I have a responsibility to guide this household, he told Mom that night. I could hear them arguing through the thin walls. You don't get to spy on my child, Mom replied. That's not your job. The argument went on for hours. The next morning at breakfast, my stepfather acted like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, asked about my plans for the day, and reminded me to be home by 6 for dinner. Mom looked exhausted. She'd obviously gotten very little sleep. We need to establish some new ground rules, she said once he left for work. No more recording devices. No more surveillance notes. Did he agree to that? Mom hesitated. He's processing. Over the next week, his behavior got worse instead of better. He removed the recording device from my bedroom, but I caught him listening outside my door when I was on phone calls. He stopped writing in the surveillance notebook, but started asking more detailed questions about my whereabouts and activities. Most concerningly, he began implementing what he called accountability measures. I had to check in with him every hour when I was out with friends. I had to provide detailed summaries of what I'd learned in each class every day. I had to leave my bedroom door open at all times, even when I was sleeping. Privacy is earned, he explained. You broke my trust by hiding things from me. Now you have to earn it back. What What did I hide from you? I asked. Your true feelings about this family, your disrespectful attitude toward authority. None of this made sense. I hadn't hidden anything from him because there was nothing to hide. I'd never been disrespectful to authority figures. But he had created this narrative where I was the problem, and every piece of evidence was interpreted through that lens. When Chloe came over again to work on another project, my stepfather insisted on sitting in the living room with a clear view of the stairs. He didn't try to hide the fact that he was watching us. Your stepdad is really intense, Chloe whispered while we worked on our chemistry homework. Yeah, he's been going through something lately. Is he always like this with your friends? No, this is new. After she was gone, he cornered me in the kitchen. I don't like that girl's influence on you, he said. What influence? We're doing homework. She's turning you secretive. Before you started spending time with her, you were more open with me. I've been exactly the same person. You're the one who changed. Don't turn this around on me. I'm responding to your behavior. People I trusted took the other side more often than I expected. When I tried to explain the situation to some family friends at a barbecue that weekend, they seemed to think his concerns were reasonable. Teenagers need structure, said my mom's friend Janet. Maybe he's just trying to provide that. He put a recording device in my bedroom, I replied. Well, that's a bit extreme, Janet admitted, but you have to understand his position. He's new to parenting, and he wants to do right by you. My Uncle Mark was even more direct. You're lucky to have someone who cares enough to pay attention. It's not involved parenting, it's surveillance. Even some of my teachers seemed to side with him when the conflict started affecting my school performance. My English teacher, Miss Rivera, kept me after class one day to ask about my recent lack of participation in discussions. It sounds like your stepfather is concerned about your academic development, she said when I finished explaining. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but he's violating my privacy. Parents sometimes cross boundaries when they're worried. Maybe there's a compromise somewhere. The more I talked to adults about the situation, the more I realized how easily his behavior could be reframed as caring instead of controlling. But they weren't living with the constant scrutiny. They didn't know what it felt like to have every conversation analyzed, every movement tracked, every private moment invaded. His campaign to protect me from my school's influence was starting to have real consequences. He'd been calling my teachers to question their curriculum choices and suggesting alternative approaches to my education. My history teacher, Mr. Coleman, pulled me aside after class to ask about a conversation he'd had with my stepfather regarding our unit on civil rights. Your stepfather is concerned about the political bias in our textbook, Mr. Coleman said. He's requested a meeting with me and the principal to discuss alternative materials. This was a problem that extended beyond my personal privacy issues. My stepfather was trying to change what I was learning in school based on his political preferences, but the bigger problem was college applications. I was planning to apply to several competitive universities, including some out-of-state schools with strong liberal arts programs. He had made it clear that he opposed this plan. You don't need to go to some expensive college to get indoctrinated by professors who hate America, he told me during one of our mandatory daily check-ins. Community college for 2 years, then transfer to the state school. I want to study political science or international relations. The state school doesn't have strong programs in those areas. Exactly. Those fields are designed to turn young people against their own country. The scariest part was that he had significant influence over my college plans, whether I liked it or not. He was married to my mom, which made him part of my household for financial aid purposes. He'd already started making comments about not wasting money on activist degree programs and suggested I consider trade school instead. Nothing wrong with honest work, he said. Better than sitting in some professor's classroom learning to hate your own family. That's when the blowback started. Things turned expensive when he started implementing financial consequences for what he called my attitude problem. He convinced my mom to dock my allowance every time I failed to complete one of his accountability measures. He even created a system where I lost allowance money if I didn't follow his rules. The accountability measures kept changing and expanding. What started as basic check-ins became detailed interrogations about my thoughts, feelings, and opinions on various topics. If I couldn't provide sufficiently detailed answers, it counted as being evasive and resulted in financial penalties. The cost of living in my own house was becoming higher than I could afford on a part-time job at the local grocery store. He implemented a new rule that I had to provide him with the phone numbers and addresses of any friends I wanted to spend time with. He would then call their parents to verify my whereabouts and discuss what activities we'd be doing. I need to know you're in safe environments with responsible supervision, he explained. The first time he did this, I was mortified. Adam's mom answered the phone and had to endure a 20-minute conversation about her family's values, their approach to teenage supervision, and their thoughts on appropriate activities for high school students. Dude, your stepdad called my mom and asked if we ever talk about inappropriate topics when we hang out, Adam told me the next day. This pattern repeated with every friend I wanted to spend time with. Natalie's parents stopped letting her hang out with me because they felt his constant phone calls were overbearing. Chloe's mom told her she was uncomfortable with the level of scrutiny he was applying to our study sessions. Within a month, my social circle had shrunk dramatically. Not because my friends didn't want to spend time with me, but because their parents didn't want to deal with his surveillance behavior. I was becoming socially isolated, which seemed to be exactly what he wanted. See how much calmer you are when you're not influenced by outside pressures? He said one evening. You're more focused on family and responsibilities. I wasn't calmer. I was depressed and anxious. But he interpreted my withdrawal as evidence that his methods were working. All I wanted was to finish high school and go to college like a normal teenager. Somehow it turned into a fight for oxygen. Then I found the one thing I wasn't supposed to see. I was looking for my birth certificate in Mom's filing cabinet because I needed it for a college application. She'd told me it was in the folder marked important documents. But when I opened that folder, I found something else entirely. There were printouts of my text messages, pages and pages of conversations with friends, formatted like they'd been copied from some kind of monitoring software. Messages from the past 3 months, including private conversations about his behavior that I'd had with Adam and Natalie. He hadn't just been recording my bedroom conversations, he'd been monitoring my phone. Every text message, every social media post, every private communication had been captured and printed out for review. There were handwritten notes in the margins, analyzing my messages for signs of disrespectful attitude and negative influences. At the bottom of the pile was a summary document written in his handwriting titled Intervention Plan. It outlined a strategy for correcting behavioral issues that included increased surveillance, restricted social contact, and educational remediation through homeschooling or transfer to a private faith-based school. The plan also included financial incentives for compliance and escalating consequences for resistance, culminating in what he called ultimate boundaries if other measures proved ineffective. I took pictures of every page with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. This was the proof I needed that his behavior was systematic and intentional. He wasn't just being overprotective or awkward. He was implementing a deliberate plan to control every aspect of my life. After that, everything shifted. I started looking at my living situation differently. This wasn't a family home where I happened to have privacy concerns. This was a surveillance state where I was the primary target. He wasn't my stepfather trying to figure out how to parent a teenager. He was an adversary who saw me as a problem to be solved. I realized I had 3 choices: submit to his control completely, continue fighting a battle I couldn't win, or remove myself from the situation entirely. I started researching my legal rights as a 17-year-old. In our state, I couldn't legally move out without parental permission, but I could live with relatives if my parents agreed to the arrangement. My mom's sister, Aunt Lisa, lived about an hour away in a different school district. She was a nurse who worked night shifts and had always been supportive of my academic goals. I called Aunt Lisa on a day when my stepfather was at work and Mom was at the dentist office. "Hey, kiddo," she said when she heard my voice. "How's junior year treating you?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm having some problems at home." I gave her an overview of the situation, focusing on the facts rather than my emotional reactions. The surveillance, the monitoring, the restrictions on my social life and college plans. Aunt Lisa listened without interrupting. "That doesn't sound like normal parenting," she said when I finished. "That sounds like someone with control issues. Have you considered staying somewhere else for a while? Just to give everyone some space to think? Would that be possible?" "Of course, you're welcome here anytime. I've got a spare bedroom, and the high school here has good programs." After I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this whole situation started, I had a realistic option. I could leave. I led with the simplest truth when I told them I was leaving. The conversation with Mom was brutal. My stepfather had convinced her that his monitoring was protective, and that my resistance to it was evidence of manipulation by outside influences. When I showed her photos of his surveillance notebook and intervention plans, she struggled to process what she was seeing. "He's just trying to help you stay on track," she kept saying. "Mom, he was recording my private conversations and planning to send me away if I didn't conform to his political beliefs." "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Mom said, looking relieved when my stepfather entered the kitchen. His explanations sounded reasonable when he presented them to Mom. He'd crafted alternative interpretations of his surveillance that made it sound protective rather than controlling. "The important thing is that we're all on the same page now," he said. "We can move forward as a family." But I knew what I'd seen in his actual files. That night, I made my decision. I called Aunt Lisa and asked if I could come stay with her immediately. "Tomorrow, I'll pack tonight and leave in the morning while he's at work." "What about telling your mom? I'll leave her a letter explaining everything." Lisa agreed to pick me up the next morning. That night, I packed 2 duffel bags with clothes, books, and anything else I couldn't replace. I wrote Mom a letter explaining my decision and left it on my pillow where she'd find it in the morning. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., 2 hours before he usually woke up for work. Lisa's car was idling in our driveway when I carried my bags outside. "Ready?" she asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. I looked back at the house where I'd lived for 2 years. My doorless bedroom window was dark. "Ready?" Lisa put the car in reverse and we drove away from his surveillance state. I didn't look back again. Lisa lived in a small city with tree-lined streets and a downtown area that consisted of a few coffee shops, a bookstore, and a movie theater. Her house was a century-old craftsman with original hardwood floors and built-in bookcases in every room. She showed me to the spare bedroom, which had a desk, a dresser, and a door that closed completely. I sat on the bed and stared at that door for several minutes. It seemed like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. "The high school is about 10 blocks away," Lisa said. "I can drive you for the first few days until you get oriented." "What about enrollment?" "I called this morning. They're expecting you Monday." Lisa had handled the practical logistics while I'd been focused on escape plans. Weeks turned into months. School settled into a routine, and by spring of senior year, the future was finally in sight. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Found your letter. Need to talk. Call me." I showed Lisa the message. She suggested waiting a few hours to let Mom process the situation. "She's going to be emotional," Lisa warned, "and he's going to try to frame your leaving as evidence of manipulation." Around 3 p.m., I turned my phone back on. 12 missed calls from Mom, 6 text messages, and 3 voicemails. I called her back. Mom answered on the first ring. "Thank God," she said. "Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm with Lisa. I'm fine. You need to come home right now." "Mom, the problems aren't misunderstandings. He was planning to push me into a strict boarding school if I didn't follow his rules." "That's not true. The boarding school materials were just research." "Research for what?" Mom was quiet for a moment. "Research for understanding your options if you continued having behavioral problems." Mom had accepted his interpretation of my behavior completely. In her mind, I was a problematic teenager who'd misunderstood my stepfather's caring oversight as inappropriate surveillance. "I'm not coming home," I said. "I'm going to finish senior year here and go to college in the fall." We talked for another 30 minutes, but Mom couldn't hear what I was really saying. He had convinced her that my concerns were teenage dramatics. Over the next week, my stepfather tried multiple tactics to convince me to return home. He called Lisa's house repeatedly, demanding to speak with me about clearing up misunderstandings. When Lisa stopped accepting his calls, he started showing up at her workplace. He called the police to report me as a runaway, but I was 17 and living safely with a relative, and my mom confirmed it on the phone. The officers were polite but firm that they couldn't force me to return. By spring of senior year, I'd been accepted to a liberal arts college. A few weeks later, my stepfather began phoning the admissions office, leaving long voicemails claiming I had behavioral problems and wasn't mature enough for campus life. He wasn't listed anywhere on my file, but his persistence created enough noise that the dean decided to check in with me directly. The dean eventually called. "We've received third-party reports raising questions about your readiness," he said carefully. "We can't share details with them, but I wanted to hear from you personally." He also mentioned some behavioral issues that weren't reflected in your application materials. These were complete fabrications. He was trying to get the college to rescind my acceptance. "None of that is true," I said. "I've never had behavioral problems, and I'm definitely ready to start college in the fall." A conference call was scheduled a few days later. The college invited me, Aunt Lisa, since I was living under her care, my mom, and, at his insistence, my stepfather. The dean and a student services representative led the call, making it clear up front that all communication going forward would come through me as the admitted student. My stepfather was masterful during the first half of the call. He expressed confusion about any reports of concerning behavior and emphasized his support for my college choice. "I can't imagine how these misconceptions developed," he said. When pressed for specifics, his story unraveled. He muttered about resistance to authority and expressing inappropriate political opinions. The dean paused, then asked, "You consider political opinions a behavioral problem for a college-bound student?" That was the moment his credibility collapsed. The call ended with the college confirming my enrollment and requesting that all future communications come directly from me. His credibility was damaged now. His attempts to sabotage my college plans had been exposed as inappropriate interference. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later. My stepfather and mom drove to Lisa's house on a Saturday morning, demanding an immediate family meeting. Lisa invited them into her living room but stayed present during the conversation. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "It's time to come home and work through our problems." "What problems?" I asked. "You mean your need to monitor my every conversation?" "I mean your tendency to misinterpret parental guidance as personal attacks." He positioned my departure as evidence of poor judgment and my refusal to return as proof of rebellion against legitimate authority. "Lisa has been filling your head with ideas about independence that aren't appropriate for someone your age," he continued. "He's finishing his senior year successfully and preparing for college," Lisa interjected. "He's not 18 yet, and even when he turns 18, he'll still need guidance from adults who care about his well-being." His version of caring required total submission to his judgment about what was best for my development. "I'm not coming back," I said. His calm demeanor finally cracked. "You think you can just walk away from your family?" "I'm walking away because you were planning to send me to a reform program for disagreeing with your politics. I was researching options for helping you develop better judgment." He stood up abruptly. "This conversation is pointless. He's been completely turned against us." He left without saying goodbye to me. Mom lingered for a few minutes, looking torn. "This is really what you want?" she asked. "This is what I need." But Mom had already chosen her side. She followed him out to their car without scheduling any future visits. Watching them drive away, I felt simultaneously liberated and abandoned. I was free from his surveillance, but I'd lost my relationship with Mom in the process. It didn't look like TV justice, but here's what actually changed. I finished senior year at Northview High School, where teachers treated students like capable human beings and college counselors supported, rather than sabotaged our educational plans. My grades recovered immediately. Without constant surveillance and ideological pressure, I could focus on learning instead of managing family conflict. I made new friends who didn't know my backstory. We had normal conversations about college plans, summer jobs, and post-graduation adventures. Most importantly, I had space to think clearly about what I wanted for my college experience and my adult life. At my aunt's, silence felt like air again. Teachers treated me like a person, not a project. That fall, I went to a small liberal arts college and studied government and rights, not because anyone got to me, but because I finally could think without someone standing in the doorway. The liberal arts college turned out to be everything I'd hoped for academically and socially. The political diversity on campus was intellectually stimulating rather than indoctrinating. Professors encouraged critical thinking about complex issues rather than promoting predetermined conclusions. I studied political science and international relations, participated in student government, and wrote papers about democratic institutions and civil liberties. Everything my stepfather had feared I would become, I became. But not because professors brainwashed me, or because I was influenced by anti-American propaganda. I became someone who valued privacy, respected boundaries, and believed in treating people with dignity because I'd experienced what it felt like to live without those things. His surveillance and control hadn't protected me from bad influences. It had taught me to recognize authoritarianism when I encountered it, and to resist attempts to manipulate my thoughts and choices. Turns out I wasn't ungrateful. I was learning to open the door to my own life.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.